Okay, so we've been making some API calls using tools such as Postman. You might be using Insomnia or something like that. But let's actually now start to make some API calls from our browser, sort of from our front-end websites that we're making. So built into the browser, we have something called Fetch.
That is so fetch.
Gretchen, stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
And what Fetch will do is it will kind of go and call these APIs for us, and then we can use that data to, display something on our front end. We will actually be using a slightly different, sort of a different package later on, but I want to show you this one because it can be a really simple way of just calling an API and, doing something with the data. Fetch is actually quite powerful. So let's just open up the starter code, which is down below. Or if you like, you can just create a index.html and then a JavaScript file and make sure that you link them up. I'm just going to make sure that I do that now. So scripts/app.js. Excellent. I'm also just going to open this in Live Server. And when that opens, I shall bring this across, as well as half and half this. Cool, so let's just inspect this and open our console. Okay, don't worry if you've got any issues here. We're just going to be looking at calling an API and reloading and loading that into the console. Okay, so let's head over to our app.js. So the way that we use Fetch is it's already sort of built into JavaScript for us, and it's built into the browser for us. We don't really have to do anything in order to kind of have it available for us to use. So what I'm going to do here, we're just going to write some code and then we'll kind of talk about what we're doing. So let's go ahead and write our URL, the URL to the server that we want to make a request to. So I'm just going to save that in a variable. So we'll say const URL equals, and then just down below you'll see that I have put the URL that we're going to call. If you've read the little note that's on there as well, this safe mode here will just make sure that we don't get any offensive jokes. If you want to receive some offensive jokes, then feel free just to remove this from the end of the URL. I personally am going to leave it in just to try and keep this video as family friendly as possible. So the way that we use fetch is we want to kind of save whatever it returns to us into a variable. So we'll say here const and then our joke, and we'll set this equal to fetch. And then inside these parentheses, let me just zoom in there for you a little bit. Inside these parentheses, what we need to do is give it the URL that we want fetch to call. So I'll just put that in here. So put our URL variable in there. Let's go ahead and console log out whatever fetch returns us. So we'll say here console.log our joke. Okay, so if I save this now and head over into my console, you'll see that we have something that's a little bit confusing. Now, unfortunately, I kind of have to teach you two things at once here. We have to look at fetch and APIs, and we also have to talk about promises. Now, this promise is basically saying, listen, JavaScript is going to run really fast. It's going to run really, really quickly, and it's going to read the first line, then the next line, then the next line. It's going to run super fast. Unfortunately, we don't know how long it's going to take for this API to return the data to us. That could happen in a couple of 100 milliseconds. It could also take a few seconds. Heck, in some instances, especially if you're looking at kind of data collecting, if you're using sort of S3 and, data storage solutions, it could even take hours for this to return back to you. So JavaScript doesn't really know how long to spend on this operation that we're asking it to fulfill. So it says, well, I've got a promise. Almost in English, I promise that I will come back to you with something. I just don't have it yet, or I don't have it until I don't have it before you're trying to run this line here. Okay, so how do we kind of overcome this? Well, there's two ways that we can overcome it, but the one that I'm going to look at with you now is something called an asynchronous function. And we'll go into something called promise chaining later on. This is definitely the kind of newer and, I would in some ways say, better way of dealing with this problem. So I'm just going to move our code down here. And we need to put this in a function. So let's do that first. So we'll say function get joke, and we'll have some parentheses there and some curly brackets. And then we'll just move these up inside our get joke. So I'm going to use option and arrow key up just to move those up into here. I'm actually going to do the same with the joke here. So option up, and that will move that into our function here. Of course, we will still need to call our function now. So I'll say here get joke. Now if we save this, let's see what we get. Okay, we still get that promise because we haven't really changed anything. Instead of, it just means that we've kind of called that function rather than making it run line by line. So what we need to do is we need to change this function into something called asynchronous. It's an asynchronous function. Now, JavaScript runs synchronously. It will run one line, then the next one, then the next one, and then the next one. No matter what, it always does that. But we can kind of disrupt that flow a little bit. Well, it's not really the flow, but we can tell it to wait for things to be done before continuing. So to make this function asynchronous, we need to add the keyword async before it, A-S-Y-N-C. Now what we need to do is we need to say, hey, we don't know how long this is going to take. So we need to say, okay, save that URL in our variable here. And then we want this joke variable to be whatever is returned from this fetch, but we want you to wait until you have something. We want to wait until that promise has been fulfilled. So before this fetch, what we need to write is await. And this is a little bit like English, right? You were saying our const joke is whatever we are awaiting to be returned from fetch. So just wait for that to work. So if we save this now, see, oh, we've got something different. We don't actually have that promise anymore. We've got this response. Okay. It doesn't really tell us anything just yet, but it's telling us that we went to this URL. It's got a cause type. We'll go into that a little bit later on. And okay, yeah, that was true. Brilliant. So our status of 200, yeah, that's true. That's okay. We have got a response. So how do we get that JSON from the joke? So what we can do here is we can say joke.json, and this is a method, so it needs the parentheses. And you'll see here in the reference that's popped up, it said, oh, this will return a promise as well. So how do we make sure that we actually get what's fulfilled from the promise rather than just the promise itself? Well, again, we say await. So if we save this now, brilliant, we actually get a joke. Fantastic. And we get a two-part joke. You know, what do you call a caveman's fart? A blast from the past. Fantastic. So just have a look around this JSON here. You can see that this joke has got no flags. It's not explicit. It's not political. You know, it's not religious or sexist as a joke. That's good. If you have taken off the safe mode from the URL, you might see some of these flags as true. But you know, that's up to you, and you can decide to do that if you like. So let's go ahead and refresh this again. Brilliant. And we get a new joke. Did you hear about the crime in the parking garage? It was wrong on so many levels. Fantastic. We get jokes. Feel free to refresh the page a few times to get all of the different jokes. So let's just quick recap here. The fetch API is built into the browser. We can use that just by using this kind of fetch method here. We do have to make sure that it's inside an asynchronous function, because going and fetching that from the URL could take an amount of time. Could be a couple of seconds, could be a minute, could be a couple of milliseconds. And in my experience, this jokes API does take only a few milliseconds to respond. But the point is, we don't know that. We're then going ahead and logging out the joke, but this JSON method on that response from fetch, that also returns a promise. That might take an amount of time, so we need to await that as well.